Oh, I missed the countdown.
It didn't show it? That's funny.
No.
Be seated here at my right hand. The Lord to my Lord did command. For of these heathen I will make a kingly footstool for your sake.
Welcome to the Bearded Bereans, where we analyze topics of the day in the light of the scriptures. I'm Jason Bolt. I'm here with Cole Strawn. This is episode 2 of season 1 of the Bearded Bereans, and today we're covering chapter 1 of C.S. Lewis's The Abolition of Man. But before we get started on that, Cole, what do you have with you there today?
Oh, I got the Undercrown. It's a Drew Estate Undercrown Maduro. Tasty stick, dark, heavy. I'm enjoying it. It's a good smoke.
Really?
Yeah.
How do you like those Drew Estate? He's got a whole bunch of different stuff. Are you a fan?
It's hit or miss. No, I'm not really. In fact, Undercrown's the only one I like. Everything else is either flavored, which I don't like at all. And I actually got a Drew Estate flavored one by accident. Didn't realize that it was flavored.
Oof.
And I was like, what is this?
Oh,
Yeah.
gives me shivers just thinking about it.
Oh, man, it was bad. So thankfully I didn't actually light it because you put it in your mouth and it's a sweet tip. So it's like,
Oh, yeah.
no, I don't want that.
Something's wrong.
Something is not right. But the Undercrown really is a delightful smoke. And I think, if they did more like the Undercrown, I would, of course, like that. But it's the only stick of theirs I smoke. What do you have?
I have the Damaso.
And
Yes, I found this in the bottom of my humidor this afternoon.
you were delighted that you found the Damaso.
I was, some people poo-poo the Padron Connecticut, like, oh, Padron shouldn't make a Connecticut. But you know what? I like Connecticut's,
Mm-hmm.
and I like Padrons,
Yeah. Yeah.
and they make a fine Connecticut.
Mm-hmm.
Plus, any cigar that comes with its own serial number, it's got to be a good cigar.
Yeah. Yeah. The care has been taken in crafting this fine cigar when I put the serial number on each individual stick.
Yep.
That's amazing. I don't know many people that do that, actually.
Padron's the only one that I know of, and it's only their anniversary series.
Yeah.
They don't put serial numbers on their regular ones.
Mhm.
But that's all right.
I think that's
Anyways.
one of the probably more shocking things most evangelicals have when thinking about Reformed theology and those that are, struggling with certain sets of doctrine, and then see that, those that espouse Reformed theology enjoy cigars and whiskey and things of that nature. A lot of people use it as a polemic against us, and against, the doctrines of grace or whatever it is, which obviously logically is silly. But I mean, why do you think it is that Reformed people tend to enjoy a cigar or a pipe or a whiskey?
2 reasons. I'm going to make friends and enemies with this answer. One reason is that we have a strong doctrine of Christian liberty, and we enjoy the things that we're free to enjoy. That's a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
2, we like to, how do I say this? If Big Eva or evangelicals don't like it, then we would like to do it.
Yes.
Regardless of whether or not it's something we should be doing. We're sort of drawn to that contrarian, stick it to the man, you can't tell me what to do sort of attitude.
Yeah, and that's really sinful in us, right? Where we are really flaunting our liberty over the weaker brother.
Yeah,
that,
that's about
that
the way to
needs
put
to
it.
be killed. Yeah.
Yeah. I think there's something in the Reformed tradition that likes to flaunt their liberty.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's really wrong. It's not good. But, you know, how do you distinguish? I mean, obviously, we're doing this on a podcast where we're filmed, and so people are free to watch the podcast or not. We're going to turn people off one way or another. But how do you feel comfortable?
How do I feel comfortable smoking a cigar on a podcast? Is that your question?
Yeah, I mean, aren't you flaunting your liberty when you do that?
No. If you don't like what's happening here, you don't have to come here and see what's happening here. I'm not
Right.
bringing it into your living room and sitting you down and forcing you to watch what we're up to. So if you
Yeah.
don't like it, please don't watch.
Sure. That's one thing I wish, you know, as we grow, mature, we would be always on guard against the sin that flaunting liberty and all those things, but also that the weaker brother would maybe start to expand and see that God made this amazingly beautiful world to share with us. And he's given us good gifts that he wants us to enjoy.
Yeah.
And that's a win right there. I mean, if anybody, even if their mind is changed just by seeing us enjoy a good stick and have good conversation glorifying to the Lord, that would be a win for me. So,
Yep, absolutely. Hey, you said something about drink too. If you can guess what I'm drinking, I'll give you one of my Padrones next time you visit.
water.
No,
What are you drinking? Tea?
it's ginger
Not
ale.
coffee. Ginger, of course. That's right. I was at your house and I opened your fridge and you got cans upon cans of ginger ale in there. I did know that. I was too busy trying to make out what was going on there. So how's your ginger ale, man, with the cigar? How does that pair?
It's quite good, you know. A root beer goes really well with a darker cigar. A cream soda will go really well with like a Cameroon wrapper, or sometimes a Connecticut, depending. The ginger ale goes well with a lighter cigar. Actually, it goes with any of them, but I think it pairs best with a lighter cigar.
Yeah.
Yep.
Huh. Yeah. I'm really enjoying the pairing of Elijah Craig to whiskey, to bourbon. And the cool thing, from what I understand, a deacon at our church told me that Elijah Craig was actually a Baptist minister who discovered putting whiskey in a burnt oak barrel would give it this color. There's a strong tradition in the Baptist tradition, a strong sub-tradition of enjoying alcohol, believe it or not, to the glory of the Lord. So, yeah, it's enjoyable with this darker Drew Estate stick.
It's great. Well, I wonder what Lewis would be smoking if he was here with us, or drinking.
Well, he was a pot guy, wasn't he?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure he had some aromatic blend of something.
Yeah, it makes sense if he was a pipe smoker.
Mm-hmm.
Pipe smoking's too sophisticated for me. There's too many parts and moving pieces, and
I'm learning.
I'm just not intelligent enough to smoke a pipe, I think.
If you're not smart enough to smoke a pipe, I'm an idiot. So, I've learned a lot from you. So, yeah.
Okay. Okay. Well, we'll see how it goes today then.
Yep, let's do it.
So we're in chapter 1, which is titled Men Without Chests. I think it's going to be a little while until we get to Men Without Chests and exactly what Lewis means by that phrase. But before we get there, we've got to sort of set the stage for us a little bit. Do you want to give us some context to chapter 1 and how he opens it, Cole?
Yeah, sure. So Lewis starts by he's got amazing wit. So if you read the first several lines, he's thankful that this publisher sent this textbook to him to review or whatever, but he says he has nothing kind to say about the authors. He's great at a turn of phrase, but basically he is critiquing I think he calls it upper school, which is I think equivalent to high school here,
Yeah.
grammar book. And this grammar book is written by who he calls Gaius and Titius, or Titius, or Titius, however you say it. And that book really is the springboard for his argument in the whole book. This is really where he sets off to prove his thesis. He calls it the Green Book, written by Gaius and Titius, obviously pseudonyms. He wants to protect their name because he is critiquing it fairly, I wouldn't even say harshly, but he's critiquing it well and giving it what for, and is nice enough to keep their names out of the press, so to speak. He selects a paragraph about written by a guy named Coleridge. So there's a lot of quoting here. You've got Gaius and Titius, or Titius, talking about a excerpt from a guy named Coleridge that discusses a scene where two men are viewing the same waterfall. And one man says, "Man, this waterfall is pretty." One man says, "This waterfall is sublime." And the critique that the Green Book levies against this situation is really has to do with Coleridge taking issue with the waterfall being described as pretty. And basically what Gaius and Titius say is this. It's not that these speakers are saying anything about the waterfall itself. They're more saying something about the emotion that waterfall creates in them. And I don't know if I said that well, but basically the idea is the waterfall is whatever you say it is. The waterfall is whatever you feel it is, would be probably better. And so we've taken away what Lewis refers to over and over again as the predicate of value. We take the predicate of value away from the waterfall, the value from the waterfall, and we move it to the emotional state within. And whenever we move it to the emotional state within, the way they say it is it only refers to the emotional state. So they use the word only, which obviously causes some issue in the hearer. So the schoolboy reading this is really where we need to get to, right? Lewis is really concerned with what this is teaching whoever reads this book, right? Whoever reads Gaius and Titius's book, it's concerning what they might be pulling from that. And so this is actually a good place for you to maybe make a correction or however, and let's move into what the schoolboy might, or what Lewis says the schoolboy might be pulling from that.
Sure. No, I think you gave a pretty good explanation of it. You made one statement that I don't know if Lewis would agree with this or not. He certainly implies that it's not true. But you made the statement that when the one man says the waterfall is sublime,
Mm-hmm.
he's not saying the waterfall is sublime. He's instead referring to the feelings or emotions that the waterfall cause in him. I don't know that Lewis would use that terminology,
right?
That the waterfall is causing the emotions. I think he's trying to make the case that the writers of this textbook are trying to separate the emotional state that a man has when he looks at a waterfall and the waterfall itself. And so the way that he characterizes it is that when the man says the waterfall is sublime, he isn't actually talking about the waterfall. He's instead talking about the feelings that he has in that moment.
Sure.
Now, how those feelings got there and whatnot, he doesn't quite really get into, but I think it's important that we
Make that
note
distinction.
that distinction.
Yep.
And so when the textbook says they're only talking about their own feelings, these two guys looking at the waterfall. And now this gets into your question about what the schoolboy is experiencing.
Well, let's stop there just for a second,
Okay.
because there is an interesting point. Lewis actually debunks this on its face. Like, before he goes off into what the schoolboy may feel, if you remember, he actually takes this idea that a waterfall or that the statement is only talking about the feelings that the person is experiencing at that moment, and says that's ridiculous. If you were to see a waterfall and it is objectively beautiful, it is objectively sublime, then it would be silly to say that you have sublime feelings about the waterfall. Because whenever someone sees something that magnificent, that beautiful, that grand, then sublime is not a feeling that you would feel. What you would feel is humility. What you would feel is a smallness. So he debunks it on its face just from that.
Yeah.
And I think
Yeah.
that really puts Gaius and Titius to bed there.
It does. And he gives the other example, too, of if I'm talking about another person and I say, oh, this is a really nice person, but what I'm really saying is I have nice feelings about this person. And
Yeah.
But obviously this other person is a real person,
Right.
who surely has some inherent human value and either is or is not a nice person. And it really like destroys all type of communication and description and I mean it destroys a whole lot more than what the writers of this textbook are trying to. You asked the question about what the schoolboy, what the high school student would be thinking or experiencing as he's going through this lesson in the textbook. And if he's being told that when someone describes waterfall or a sunset, I saw this incredible sunrise 2 mornings ago. I almost sent you the picture. Sun was coming up. I mean, orange clouds, and it had snow, and I was out elk hunting. It had snowed, and the snow was orange. It was incredible. It was absolutely amazing. And so when a person sees that sort of thing, and they say, wow, this is just incredible. And then the schoolboy is told what the person is describing is only his own feelings, and he isn't actually describing the sunset or the waterfall or whatever the object is. Then he isn't actually assigning anything to the waterfall. He isn't actually even talking about the waterfall. He's only talking about himself, which raises a number of issues. One of them would be, well, then what is the waterfall? Right? Is it even there? And if the waterfall is there, like what's its relationship to the man who's observing it? Is there a relationship between them? As we mentioned before, education is the process of orienting the student to God and the world that he has created. And so if I can't even describe the things around me anymore, how can I be oriented to them and have a right relationship with them? Does that make sense?
So it's that all predicate of value are meaningless,
Right.
and that it's really a statement made about anything is really about the speaker's own emotion.
Yeah.
And then second, he really brings up the unimportance of that.
Yeah.
Right. So, you could take that several different ways. What do you think Lewis means by that emotion is unimportant?
Even the phrase, the emotion is unimportant. I've told students of mine in class, one of the things that I do in class is when students start their question or whatever, and they say, well, I feel like such and such. I stop them and I say, I don't care how you feel. I want to know what you think. And once they know me and they're accustomed to it, then they're used to it. But at first, it's really jarring to them. Like,
Sure.
what do you mean you don't care what I feel? And they're just so accustomed to feeling their way through things rather than thinking their way through things. So, what was your question? I got off on a little tangent there.
Well, you did, and I think that's how most readers would take the unimportant thing. What I don't think what Lewis is saying in that moment is that other people are viewing your things as unimportant. What he's saying is it doesn't matter what your feeling is; it's your feeling.
Yes. Yeah. So that's where I was going with it, and just commenting on your statement about his feelings not being important.
Sure.
And how jarring it is to.
It is kind of funny how jarring that is.
It's hilarious, actually.
Yeah.
But okay, I'm going a little bit further down the trail here.
Sure.
When my students, it's jarring to them at first, right? And some of them literally kind of do this, right? But once they're taught how to think, and they can think and feel, like their whole life just opens up and blooms. It's incredible. And so yeah, we laugh because it's jarring to the students and all that, but we're not laughing at the students. We're laughing with them as they grow and develop those kinds of things.
Right.
So back to these two men and their feelings about the waterfall not meaning anything. I think what Lewis is getting at there is if the one guy has sublime feelings, whatever that is, and the other guy has pretty feelings, whatever that is, it doesn't matter which one you have. Either of those are just fine. And in fact, if there was a third guy and he had nice feelings and there was a fourth guy and he had disappointed feelings, all of those would be perfectly fine. It doesn't matter if you have this one as opposed to that one, because the waterfall, as we've already established, isn't actually meriting anything from you. You're just there as some kind of being who has some kind of emotion, and whatever that is just fine.
So the waterfall doesn't create any feelings in someone, according to this new way of viewing things. It's really just what is the human feeling at that moment, and there is no statement on whether that feeling is correct or incorrect.
Right.
Because from our worldview, from a Christian worldview, God has made everything. He's established things with value, with inherent value. And each thing merits a certain response, duty, action. All these things merit certain appropriate responses. Basically, what Gaius and Titius are doing is they're taking away from us the idea that there are appropriate and inappropriate responses to anything.
Yep.
Is that a fair summary?
Yep, I think so. Yep, it's this idea that that there's no such thing as a proper emotion in a given situation and an improper emotion in that given situation, but that really the arbiter of what is true or what is real really gets placed in the emotional center of the self. That whatever emotion or sentiment or whatever I happen to be experiencing internally right now at the moment becomes the arbiter of truth. And so my emotion is true, and that's the way it is. Your emotion, Cole, can be true as well.
And if those are contrary to each other, that's irrelevant. It doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter. Yeah, which I was going to say, it leads to a further point by the writers of the textbook, that if my emotion is one thing and it's true, and your emotion is another thing and it's true, and that's just fine, but they're contradictory to each other, what value then do either of our emotions have? Or do they have any value?
Right. Yeah. And obviously it takes value away from them to anybody but the feeler, right? So thus dissolving any kind of relationships or anything, it really isolates the person. This is a book that was written or published 75, 80 years ago. So the Lewis is pointing this out and building this argument, and really, we discussed about the prophetic nature of Lewis in his understanding, taking this paragraph and building this argument. And he predicted a few things, and we'll get into those more, chapter 2 and 3. But I would like to kind of take what we've discussed now, just in the last 15 minutes, and connect it to today, right? So, because this was happening 75 years ago, what do we see today?
Wow, I don't even know where to start, but the first thing that comes to my mind is the breakdown of the marriage covenant. And maybe it's just because all of us are related to a marriage covenant in one way or another. Either we're in one, or we're the product of one, or the product of what should have been one. And what has happened over the last, I don't know how many years, maybe 80, is that two people, and I see this amongst high schoolers now, it's crazy to watch. Two people will come into contact with each other, and one of them will have romantic feelings, and the other one will have romantic feelings associated with the other person. And so they'll begin some kind of a relationship, and they're both really enjoying it, and it's great. And some period of time will go by, and one of them will stop having those feelings, and it won't be so great anymore. And so they're like, well, they call it falling out of love. And so they'll go their separate ways and move on to something else. And if one of them still has those feelings, that person's really hurt and it's sad and all that. And then they go off, find another person, and they repeat the process. And then those people, they're doing this as children, as teenagers, as young adults, and then as young adults, they get married. And it goes great for a year or two or 10 or whatever. And then one of them suddenly doesn't have these feelings anymore. And how many times have I heard, as a pastor or in whatever situation, a spouse who's going to leave the other spouse and says, I'm just not happy anymore. As if that's the thing that determines whether or not you're supposed to stay married. Well, the person isn't making me happy. But because we have located the center of truth, the center of reality in how I feel about a thing, if I'm so suddenly no longer happy in a marriage, well, I can just leave then. Because the marriage doesn't have any value. My relationship to this other person really isn't a relationship. It's just two people having feelings independently of each other. And as long as that works out for both of them, good, they should stay together. And when it stops working out, then one can go the other way. And this notion has permeated every aspect of our society. It's crazy. To where literally, even in the Christian church, people operate this way. That I'm no longer happy, so I can walk. I'm no longer obligated by the oath that I swore.
Right. Yeah. And it's really insidious how this thing works. So, one of the reasons Lewis is working, from this direction, from education as a foundation, is because whenever you're educating a child, you really are shaping the child. And so we've got 80 years of public educated people, government educated, however you want to put it, that are experiencing these relationships, that are filling our churches, that are, and it's a very difficult topic to get into, but Lewis really does a great job saying, this grammar book, it's not as if this grammar book is teaching full-blown theory. What they're doing is they're making a statement. They're teaching an assumption that years down the road, the schoolboy takes a side in a controversy based on that assumption that's never been evaluated. It's never been, accepted or rejected. It was just assumed to be true as a schoolboy. And now that informs everything he does in later thinking. People can counteract that some. And part of our job as an adult is to be able to analyze some assumptions we've made. But the reality is, especially in modern times where logic is not even a class anymore. Like it's an elective if you're lucky in public schools, right?
Yeah, right. I introduced it as an elective in my school, and people were like, "Logic? What's that?"
Oh, only the foundation for how humans think. It's mind blowing, right? How can you think clearly without understanding, informal, formal logic and fallacy? And there's so much that helps you wade through falsehoods and truth. And really, this is kind of off on a tangent, but once you lose objective truth, why should you be able to reason to truth? Right? And so, of course, they take it out of schools because there's no reason to reason to truth.
There's no reason.
Right.
Rather than using logic to derive a conclusion from certain premises, instead we just feel through stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And everything is designed to help me figure out how I feel.
Yeah.
It's not designed to help me analyze my feelings or figure out what's real or true or anything. It's simply designed to help me better understand what I'm feeling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really a travesty. I've heard you call the family, of today, and I think this was in episode 1, how the family is really disintegrated, right?
Yeah.
And I put that pause there just like you do, and I think that's well placed. It's intentionally disintegrated, right?
Yeah.
And it starts with the marriage covenant. And whenever that is gone, obviously chaos reigns.
Well, you started to talk about how the writers of this textbook didn't set out to write a philosophy book that would argue for subjectivism. Is that the next thing that you want to go into, or is your question?
So I want to. What I was saying is they were not overtly teaching philosophy.
Right.
Not that they didn't set out to teach philosophy, because I think they did set out to teach philosophy.
Okay.
And yes, that is what I want to get into. Yeah.
Okay. So
yeah,
it's a really good point, good observation that objectively or ostensibly they set out to teach how to critique literature.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't set out objectively or ostensibly to write a philosophy book that would argue for subjectivism. In fact, they aren't even arguing for subjectivism. Their objective is for the schoolboy to accept subjectivism, but the way that they do it is brilliant. Is rather than arguing for it, because obviously you can't argue for subjectivism. What standard are you going to use to argue for subjectivism? Like, it doesn't work.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So they don't argue for it. Instead, what they do is they presuppose a world that is subjective, and they set the student down in it and say, okay, now how do we feel about such and such in this world? And they never even tell the student this is what's happening. They just create this pseudo reality, put him in the middle of it, and then move along like everything is normal.
Mm-hmm.
And the student doesn't even realize, and he may not ever realize it. And like you said earlier, and Lewis mentions this, it could be 20 years down the road where he's in a situation that touches on those assumptions or those presuppositions that have been embedded into his thinking, and he's either agreeing with or disagreeing with something that has gone unanalyzed in his mind. He's just presupposed it. And that is the only way that the subjectivists can push subjectivism, is if they presuppose it and then expect everybody to accept it.
And this is how they replicate their worldview, right?
Yeah.
It's not that they want anybody to come to their side after thinking these issues through. Right. They want to teach this. They want to inculcate this as children so they don't have to worry about making sound argumentation for why abortion should be legal, right? They would rather just scream, my body, my choice, right? And it's like, okay, we're not thinking through this at all because it's objectively another body inside of another body.
Right.
So we don't want to analyze that. But I want to press in on this because this is important. One of the things, a common issue that people have with my position on homeschooling or private schooling is, well, I shouldn't have to teach my kid math or whatever, which is stupid, right? That's you're responsible for your kid learning math. You can outsource that to whoever, but my question to you is, who are you outsourcing it to?
Right.
And we'll probably come back to that. But this is why it's dangerous to outsource it to public schools, to the government schools. Number one, nothing is neutral, right? There is no neutrality. That's a myth. And so when you teach math, you're not teaching it neutrally. You're teaching it from a certain worldview with a certain set of assumptions, with a certain philosophy that is designed to pull your child to their way of thinking. And so they may get to 2 + 2 = 4. But they can't tell you why 2 + 2 = 4. We've discussed this before. But they are also capable of teaching assumptions in this class in line with their philosophy, and you would never know it. And I point to this little paragraph as proof. We have a grammarian. We have two grammarians writing a textbook, and instead of doing their job and writing about literature, instead you get the work of amateur philosophers, which is exactly what it is.
Yeah.
But they're supposed to be teaching literature, and what you're getting is philosophy in the form of assumptions that are presupposed. And so this is English, right? Now let's talk about every other subject. Science, it's overt and covert, right? Math, it's probably more covert. There are ways that they're pushing their worldview on your kids, and you will never know it.
Yep.
And that's scary, but you have to know that that's what is going on.
Yep.
Because it's not about teaching a systematic religion. It's about presupposing a certain worldview and pushing that out to your kids through all these different lessons. And
yes, I think one of the mistakes that we've made as Christians, as parents, as the church, as Americans, is accepting this idea that there's neutral space, and that the purpose of education is to either prepare the child to succeed in post-secondary studies or to prepare the child for the workforce in some way, or maybe a combination of both of those things, right?
Yeah.
And so if my son is going to be an engineer, what difference does it make really what the worldview is of his physics teacher and his calculus teacher, right? They need to teach him physics and calculus so that he can go to Montana Tech or wherever and get his engineering degree. If he's going to be a welder, what difference does it make what the worldview is of his teacher who's teaching him how to weld? He just needs to know how to weld. And so in our minds, we've created this sort of realm that's neutral, where you could go and learn physics in a sort of a sanitized, neutral space where he only learns physics and doesn't learn anything else. But that doesn't exist. It's not real. It's fake, and particularly with children, because education with a child regardless of what form it takes, if we're talking about classical education or Montessori or the traditional, prep school or whatever it is molding the child.
Right.
That's what education does by nature. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
that's what parents do with their kids is they're molding the kid. And so when we outsource that to the government, then the government is going to use physics and calculus and maybe a welding class and all these other things. And they might teach them physics to some extent, but they're still using it to mold the child into some kind of image. And the question is, into what image is the child being molded?
Mm-hmm.
And if it's not a Christian education, then the child is not being conformed and molded into the image of Christ. He's being conformed to the image of something else, whether that's the state or some other idol or whatever it might be. And so we have shipped off our children to some pagan entity to mold our children into something contrary to what we believe.
Yeah, well, to what we believe and to reality itself. And so,
yes, I hesitated before I said that, but
yes, yeah.
Thank you for clarifying. When I say what we believe reality, what the scriptures teach.
Right. And so, what was Van Til's? You referenced it earlier. Definition of education.
The process of orienting the student to God and the world He has created.
Okay, and so whenever the world is educating your child, they're orienting your child not to the world God has created, but to the world that they want to impose.
Yeah.
Right? And so not only are they trying to make your child into something that is opposite the image of God, but they are molding them into loyal subjects of the world order. And that is clearly what's happening. It's not conspiracy theory or anything like that. All you have to do is think about these things critically, and you will see that that's the case. I mentioned earlier that there is no neutrality. One of my favorite Russians, who is not here today, unfortunately, but we introduced him on the last episode. Really check that out if you haven't yet. But he's fond of saying, it's as if, you could say to anybody, we've got this Nazi coming through town. He's a mathematician. He's going to spend 30 minutes and teach your child math. It would be absurd for you to let your child go learn math from that Nazi. It is no less absurd.
Nobody would do it.
Nobody would do it. Nobody would do it in this day and age.
Right.
Christians, you wouldn't do it. Pagans wouldn't do it because Nazis, that's bad, right? Nazi bad. But it is equally absurd for a Christian parent who is on the side of good to allow someone that's on the side of evil teach their kid math. And so whenever we're thinking through these things, we want to think in a thesis antithesis manner. There is always a rejection of all the things that are good, beautiful, and true. And someone can do it overtly. And here's the thing. In public school, you may even have a Christian teacher that is teaching your child something in that class. But the reality is the curriculum that they're teaching from is loaded with these assumptions.
Yeah.
And so they're effectively teaching for the enemy.
Yep.
And so this is a harsh statement. And if you're a public school teacher, man, find a way to get out of that, but find a way to counteract it where you're at now. You have a contract, fulfill the contract. You need to teach contrary to your curriculum most times. You need to be teaching from your worldview. You need to be taking territory for the cause of Christ while you're there. That statement is not for you parents, however. Your child is not a missionary. They have not yet formed any kind of coherent worldview in order to evangelize anyone. at least 8 hours away from you a day.
Yeah.
Well, in the stew pit of dualistic, pluralistic nonsense.
Yeah. Man, that's a great point. I hear that so often from parents. I've been in education for about 10 years and I've worked in charter schools, so
Mm-hmm.
not quite public schools. Maybe we should do an episode sometime on charter schools in their place and whether or not they have one. And I've worked in a number of different Christian schools, and I can't tell you how many times I've talked to parents who've decided that they're going to send one or all of their kids or however many to public school, and they'll say, well, they're going to be a light in a dark place, and they can be a missionary there and evangelize, and what I would like to say to people who have that thinking is, well, would you send your 12-year-old daughter to Saudi Arabia to be a missionary
Right.
right now without you?
Right.
Just say for 6 months, right? And then she'll come back for 3 months, spend 3 months with you, and then go back to Saudi for 6 months. Would you do that? None of them would, of course. And well, why not? Well, it's not safe. The society would be opposed to them. It wouldn't work. It doesn't make sense. But the public school classroom is no safer place for
Mm-hmm.
a 12-year-old child than society in Saudi Arabia.
Yeah.
And yet we just really hand them off.
Right. We've got a real quick illustration of that, and then we've got to wrap up. But I was the paraprofessional in a school in Texas for 4 or 5 years, and I was attached to a student with autism, and we would go from class to class. He was mostly functional, and really had a good time actually learning in classes. So I'm not talking about anything I'm unacquainted with. The story that I want to relate to you, though, is we were walking through, and there's this sweet, young, Christian, innocent 12-year-old girl who's approaching us, and we're approaching her in a hallway. And when I see her, my student loves this girl, right? He adores her because she pays attention to him. Just an all-around sweetheart. So we go say hi. We're on our way to her. She sees us. She's on her way to us. But there's this group of boys in the middle of the hallway. Okay, they're in between classes, the passing period where they go to the next class, and they're all kind of huddled over this phone, just kind of snickering. And I, just from being in that situation before, I know this is a bad deal, right? I know that they're probably looking at some sort of pornography or something untoward on their phone. Well, unfortunately, this girl gets to that group before I do, and one of the guys sees her and takes the phone and says, "Look at this." And Jason, you should have seen her face. It was terror and disgust, and it was just this mixture of emotions that I'm sure she wasn't ready to feel at that moment in time. And there was nothing that she could have done to avoid seeing what that was. Right? And of course, I'm the only adult in the area. I've got to take care of the situation, take the kids to the office, call the girl's parents, get them up here, just tell them what happened. It was an ordeal, right? But she will never get whatever innocence that she had back. That's gone, right? Like, she's seen these things. And that's in a relatively good public school in the Bible Belt where Christian culture is everywhere. It's probably 8 years ago now, 9 years ago maybe, when that happened. So, COVID nonsense hasn't happened. All these things, the acceleration hasn't happened. Public school isn't safe. It's not.
Yeah.
It's not safe for your boys. It's not safe for your girls. And so I plead with you, please, find a way. There's churches that will help you.
Yeah. The government is really crafty in the way that it has set all of this up. Most state constitutions have something in them that guarantee the right of every child to be publicly educated. And then the state goes through and systematically extracts money from everyone in order to pay for that, which has the effect of making it difficult for you to afford to pay to educate your child somewhere else.
Yes.
So they make it super easy for you to just send your kid to the government and really difficult for you to not send your kid to the government. They put schools right in the middle of town and try and make them part of the community and part of the identity of the people who are there. And it's an incredibly effective and successful scheme that they have going. And it's never going to change. It's never going to get better. It's not as though if we elect the right person to the school board next time around, suddenly everything will get better. It's just a matter of how much worse it will get. And so the solution, as you said, is to get your kids out of public schools.
Yeah. Yeah. And one of the things that we would be happy to do is if you're struggling finding help to do that, get in touch with us. We want to help you get the resources you need to make that happen. And it may be repentance in small steps. It may have to be that way. But let's get on a plan to make this a reality for you and your children. And man, if you're a church and you're listening to this and you don't have any kind of way to help your people get their kids out of the public schools, you need to figure this out. This is important. We're losing that battle as long as we're trying to play that game. Yep. We need to get them out. We need to educate our kids in accordance with Deuteronomy 6:4-9. It is the parents' responsibility. In church, it's your responsibility to shepherd those parents and to help those parents make those things right in their life. So, man, we are right up against the hour. We've got 55 minutes in. So 5 minutes left. Is there anything else you'd like to cover? We've covered maybe a third of the first chapter of Abolition of Man.
No, we've got a good introduction. They're pushing subjectivism. And of course, as we'll see in the next bit of the chapter, they're not actually pushing subjectivism. That's just a tool that they're using in order to get rid of the biblical Christian worldview. And then they'll seek to impose their own. And that has certainly happened and is happening all around us. So we'll get more into that next time.
Awesome. Amen. Well, until next, God bless.
The kings who fight against my Lord shall taste his wrath and meet his sword.